Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Mall Remix, Breathing New Life into Old Malls. Before I hand it off to Jason Besky to start our panel discussion, I would like to go over a few items. Please note that all attendees will be on mute for the duration of the presentation. If you have a question, please enter it in the question section. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation in the order they were received. This webinar is being recorded and will be provided to attendees along with a certificate for your records in an email after the webinar. I'll now turn it over to Jason to start our session.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to today's roundtable discussion. My name is Jason Besky, and I am a senior urban designer with Stantec's Urban Places in the Washington, D.C. area. However, today we pulled together a roundtable of experts that David Dixon, colleague of mine, and I will move through the discussion. We'll go over the topics in a little bit. First, we want to give a little bit of a background and set the stage for our roundtable discussion today. You know, malls have been a growing topic, and we certainly see them in our work. There's a whole range of opportunities that we've run into as consultants and local government planners. And these range of opportunities that we have really align with the sponsorships that we have today. So we'd like to thank our sponsors in America Walks, the Congress for New Urbanism, and International Downtown Association, where we have some allied thoughts behind how the future of malls can start to contribute to communities and provide complete neighborhoods. Just to give a quick background from my perspective, and then how we're going to move into the webinar today. You know, malls very much, as we were publicizing this webinar on social media, one of the comments that came through was how someone longed for the nostalgia of a shopping mall. And I can certainly relate to that. Being part of the Generation X, the latchkey kids, we really, I think, popularized malls throughout the 80s and into the 90s. However, I do think, to a large degree, the shopping mall as we knew it was really a lightning in the bottle moment, where, you know, perhaps we'll have a museum of a mall someday so someone can go into an experience, but you really had to be part of that to really understand where things were in the 80s and going into the 90s. You know, in pop culture today, the malls are popularized again in Stranger Things and other shows and songs and lots and lots of articles. But what used to be 1,500 malls at the heyday it's quickly moving well below 1,000 malls. And given where retail has taken us, and David will cover this in a little bit, we're going to see more drastic changes as we move forward into the next 5 years. Look at JCPenney's and Macy's alone, who 65% of their holdings were in malls, and whose holdings represent 6% of malls nationwide. Companies like that going bankrupt have a large impact. And you add that to the other retailers, and you quickly snowball and get to where we are right now, where we do have a lot of opportunities for the future of malls. So let me introduce our panel today. And David Dixon and I will be moderating the discussion. We'll lead up to a series of questions here after the introduction. But first, David is Vice President of Stantec's Urban Places and Fellow. He's a sought-after expert in urban planning and design. He's well known for helping create new mixed-use districts, both in cities and suburbs. David and I authored the book, co-edited the book, Suburban Remix. Colleen Dixon is a senior associate and architect for Stantec, and she is in the Vancouver area. For over 20 years, she's worked on a wide variety of projects, ranging from master plans to buildings and urban design in all settings as well. Kent Gonzalez is with us today. Kent is Vice President at Northland, where he manages large-scale, complex, mixed-use development projects. Kent has over 30 years of diverse real estate development experience, both public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and he has managed over $1 billion of development. Stephen Levin is the founder and Chief Operating Officer of Centennial Real Estate, and he is a 36-year veteran of the real estate industry with experience in investment, management, financing of commercial real estate. He'll bring a great perspective today to our discussion. Carlo Ciamponi is a senior associate and designer for Stantec, and he's focused on translating our clients' visions into places that are architecturally, socially, and intellectually relevant, all the way from high-rise buildings and public environments to music festivals and experiential retail. Larissa Ortiz is the Managing Director of Research and Analysis at StreetSense. Larissa brings over 20 years of experience for advising public, private, and nonprofit sector clients on real estate strategy in urban environments. And last but not least, Whitney Livingston is the Chief Operating Officer of Centennial Real Estate, where she leads corporate operations and property services to develop and execute operating, repositioning, and redevelopment plans. So that will be our panel today. But let me just start out a quick mention on a research study that I recently completed for NAIOP based on repurposing retail centers. This was a deep look at dead and dying malls and how developers are actually repurposing these locations. And to give a little bit of a framework for today's discussion, there's really kind of three general areas. Things can kind of shift between these areas or maybe fall slightly outside of it, but repositioning is an opportunity. The image shown here is 100 Oaks Mall in Nashville, which went from a mall property to a agglomeration of Vanderbilt Medical Center's offices that occupy a majority of this mall, which has brought this mall property itself back to life. They also do put inline retailers at the base of the mall. Adaptation, this is an example from Austin where the mall is still used and it's adapted to accommodate a community college, the Austin Community College. But at the same time, the parking field is being adapted to accommodate a mixed-use neighborhood that will feed into the mall. And then finally, redevelopment. And when I talk about redevelopment, it's a complete redevelopment of a site where a mall is torn down and redeveloped as oftentimes a mixed-use neighborhood. There are increasing examples of Amazon acquiring these sites and redeveloping into fulfillment centers. One thing that's really attractive about these malls is their location and access for both vehicles and oftentimes transit connections. So for today's discussion, what we really want to try to draw out of the panelists is what are the community benefits that these sites offer, given the fact that they have been in decline for so many years with declining tax base and declining employment. Moving forward, what can these sites offer? And that's what we're going to try to draw out. And we're going to do this around 6 key topic areas, and we'll put slides up showing what those topic areas as we get into the discussion. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to David Dixon, who's going to set the stage. And David, you should have control of the PowerPoint now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I'll find out in a split second here. So welcome everyone. It's great to have a chance to talk to you, and very much look forward to your questions. That's what really matters. So as Jason mentioned, he and I edited Suburban Remix. Suburban Remix is based on the premise that while that postcard at the bottom, which we used for a series of webinars we did about Suburban Remix, while suburbs were created, the suburbs we know today, in an era dominated by middle-class families and white flight and a whole series of phenomena we know, we live in a very different world, which actually offers as much opportunity to suburbs as that period did, but a very different kind of opportunity. And I think this program today on the future of malls will sort of encapsulate that and crystallize that future, because it's about a dense urban future, a denser urban walkable future for suburbs as well as cities. So let me dive in and see if I can go forward here. And so far I cannot. So you know what, Jason, next, please. You can. Okay, thanks. So a couple of us were involved in a wonderful project just outside of Roanoke to transform a dying mall into a new urban center, community center. And somebody raised his hand after the third meeting and said, oh, I get it. North America is a suburban continent with an urban population. And I just wish I could claim to have thought of that. He really crystallized what is happening. And next, please. So this happy fellow got a little tired of what he had to do. Next, please. Also, his kids grew up and left the house. I'm going to talk in a minute about some fundamental transformative trends that are reshaping our regions, our suburbs, our cities. And I'm going to start by talking about what we think the impact of COVID will and will not be. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but we have, over the next 20 years, the most urban housing market this country will ever have had, meaning it is fundamentally dominated by singles and couples without kids. More than half of our growth will be folks over 65 for the next 20 years. This is not the stuff of single-family detached housing suburbs. This is it's a fundamentally urban market. I will remind everybody that after 9/11, there were headlines that said things like "density kills" and "this is the end of towers." That were immediate reactions that were fair and heartfelt, but not at all how the world, then our urban world, unfolded, because the trends I'm going to talk about were already at work. It's not that our values or tastes have changed, it is that we are changing. So next, please.
You got it.
This is not the future of urbanism. This is a lifestyle center. This is the first round of trying to rethink of malls is something that would pretend to be urban places, but next, please. So I had the privilege and opportunity of working with the good folks of Dublin, Ohio, very affluent suburb that has claimed a good deal of the Class A office space from Columbus, Ohio for many years, with office parks that looked like this, and you can get the picture from that mirrored glass, gazing out at the surface parking lot. Dublin was one of the first places to realize that this was not the future. Next, please.
I think you have control now, David, if you want to grab it.
Thanks. And Dublin is creating out of failing strip centers and outmoded suburban office parks, a genuine walkable downtown. And to me, nothing better captures the future that malls can bring to suburban communities as their new centers, their new hearts, and also their new fiscal engines. Next, please. Oh, no, I'm doing it now. Okay, sorry. So let's start with the new norm 101, and it begins with demographics and the fundamental urban opportunity. Again, one that we have not seen in my overly long lifetime. So when I was growing up, nobody in this audience recognizes any of these folks, but only one of the adults was actually paid to do the work they did when I was growing up. Everybody smiled, was happy, and we don't look, and there were lots of kids. Today, when we turn to social media or anything that reflects our reality back to us, it looks very different. And that is because going forward, literally 80+%, and this has probably been true for the last 5 or 6 years, of net new households, this is our housing market. Our housing market is 2/3 of our real estate market. Our real estate market is what shapes our suburbs, our cities, our regions. So this demographic shift will literally reshape us. It is about a far more urban future in suburbs for malls as well as cities. And one thing I will note, when Jason and I are doing some work in suburbs today, and we sit in city council meetings and hear a lot of folks say, you know, I'm retired now, I can't afford that real estate tax increase. When more than half of our net population growth for 20 years is going to be fixed folks over 65, suburbs in particular need to turn to new fiscal futures. And malls, which have often been the largest taxpayer, are an excellent opportunity to tap these shifts to create a new fiscal future. So this introduces the economic imperative. You know, when fewer folks have kids, something else happens, our workforce starts to grow a lot more slowly. So today, our workforce is growing about half the rate it did as recently as 2010. In 2040, we will still add fewer net new workers than we did in 2010. So what does this have to do with malls? Well, at the same time, 90+% of net new jobs require some form of higher education, and soon probably 2/3 of jobs will require 4 years or more education. This is net new jobs. There are not enough educated workers to go around. Jason and I are working with some of the largest tech and innovation employers in Canada on a project right now. And one of the things that's very clear is that while COVID has changed work habits and many more folks will probably work remotely, these folks are in the business, these companies, of finding locations where they can attract educated labor and an educated workforce. This workforce is in short supply. There's probably no city in America that doesn't have to compete, that has enough. And boy, do these folks want to live, work, play, and innovate in urban places. Now, they're not all going to go downtown. But when they come to the suburbs, it will be to urban, walkable, cool places in the suburbs. In fact, that's what Jason and I are working on. And then there's a third leg to this proverbial stool here, which is what's happening to mobility. That friendly little fellow there is actually, we're going to see a lot more of him or her in coming years. So Stantec has a really strong mobility innovation program, practice. And one of the things we've learned from our dear colleagues is that within 10 years, a little bit more than 60% of vehicles on the road in the US will be connected. They won't drive themselves yet, but they will park themselves. They will park themselves far more compactly and far more efficiently in terms of using empty spaces than we do today, which means that we today, or in the next 5 years, may have as many parking spaces as we will need for the rest of this century. And one of the things we have to work really hard at is avoiding spending dollars on new parking. It's really tough to convert a parking structure to housing or office at some point and have it compete with new purpose-built housing or office across the street. Most 10 years later, we'll be in the era of autonomous mobility, probably in urban areas. This can be another webinar, shared autonomous mobility. I should say, Jason and I are working today on redevelopment of a suburban area where we're putting in an automated, meaning frankly, autonomous shuttle. So this technology is alive today. But we will be in the era when we will not need to build new parking. In fact, we're going to have to think about what to do with the parking that we have. The reason I emphasize this is twofold. One of the biggest competitive edges that suburban development today has is its surface park. You save 15, 25, sometimes 30% of development costs that way. That edge will go away as we need much less parking. But also, most of us find the amenity we seek, the cool places to walk, the parks, the coffee, the beer. We'll walk about 5 minutes to get to these. So we think in terms of 5-minute amenity sheds. When you can hop on an autonomous shuttle and go from point A to point B to that art gallery, get that beer, maybe get more of that beer, coffee, etc. The whole, a much larger area, the whole mall, for example, can become the amenity shed, so that the cool place, any place, can amenitize the entire place. But it also, and of course, it will increase the densities we can achieve. So finally, let me close with what are some thresholds for success. This is not an all-inclusive list, just some headlines. So it starts with compact critical mass. This is a place affectionately known as Marshall's Plaza today. Kent Gonzalez is the developer who is managing the project for the development firm and leading the effort that is redeveloping this into this. What to me is in many ways most important is we are turning a place that lacks the density to be walkable. It takes about 1,000 units within a 5-minute walk to bring a block of Main Street retail to life. Without that retail, people, it's not trees and brick sidewalks, it's the things to walk to that cause walkability. You have to start with the density, the compact critical mass to achieve it. Second, transformative planning. Let's put markets to work. We have some terrific development colleagues on this panel. In fact, the majority of folks have a development background. We're working on I just love this project. It's a large mall, just sort of the edge of Boston. As the big box retailers there shrink in terms of their business and need less and less of the acres and acres of parking, that parking is being transformed into a new mixed-use walkable neighborhood. This is mall remix at work, happening block by block over time. And then I want to conclude with authenticity. I had the privilege and honor of working on planning for a project that is now basically 9 million will be soon 9 million square feet. Jason, I think anyway, in Tampa, Florida, Water Street, terrific project. But it is not the millions of square feet of office or new condominiums that are going to bring character. I need to ask you to go next, please. The authenticity will come from how we are able to bring the living culture of Tampa into the midst of this place. The fellow doing a wheelie is wheeling down something called Maker's Alley, which is just a lost space that's being used to bring in the coolest chefs and ceramics makers and artists, etc., in Tampa to help be the living culture of this place. To the parking garage on the right side of your slide was lined with very inexpensively with artists on the first floor, because suddenly it was not the back of a development, it became the front. They get one bay of parking, so it goes about 20 feet in, very simply finished. But 25,000 people come on Friday nights to tour these artist galleries and then eat in the restaurants in the development behind this. But more importantly, it is now, every day it is new, because it is tapping into the artists, those who represent the living culture of the Denver region. Next, please. And I love to conclude with this image. We're doing a plan. This is actually for downtown Memphis, but this is about really looking to the diversity of your communities and bringing it into the heart of what has been maybe corporate and not so diverse in past. This is actually sort of at the edge of downtown, to bring their creativity, their drive to help us find the authenticity that comes from our living culture and our living communities. So thank you. I look forward to hearing from my panelists and your questions.
All right. Thank you, David. And I think to illustrate your points at the end, because you obviously showed Tampa and downtown Memphis, but I think lessons can be learned, and that the ingredients that work in cities oftentimes will work in repurposing mall sites, and tapping into the local culture and authenticity is extremely important. So we're going to kick it off here with the roundtable, and we have a series of questions. The first category is going to be around ownership and consolidation. I do want to mention too, I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat box if you want to access that to the repurposing retail center study that I completed from NAIOP. So if you want to grab, I'll get that in there in a little bit. And if you want to grab that sometime throughout, that'd be great. You can click on the link. All right, so I'm going to kick this off, and I'm going to ask a question of Stephen regarding ownership and consolidations. So Stephen, most people think of malls as large single ownership parcels. However, we know that reality is far more complex with ownership structures, et cetera. So from your experience with Main Place, I know that's a mall you had worked on, maybe you would describe that a little bit, but how did the ownership and site control impact your ability to achieve a complete neighborhood in that area?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you, Stephen.
Okay, good, because apparently my camera isn't working well, but fortunately the microphone is. Well, thank you for the question and for including me on the panel. Yeah, I think that, David's intro was great and very much the way we look at our projects in the future, and the conversion of the mall that was created 40 years ago to the shop, dine, entertain, live, work, play destination, primarily suburban destination, which is where majority of the malls are. And the challenge is, we've spent years doing this, and the interesting part about it is, as David's described, what you want to do is terrific, but it is incredibly challenging to navigate through converting a mall that was built under one purpose, which was department store focused and controlled, to something today that is controlled by the owner of the shop space, the mall itself. And that is the single, really in our minds, tremendously overarching obstacle in trying to create this, because with Main Place, we had to first buy our development rights, which is not typical in a project, but for complicated reasons, there were development rights on our site owned by a third party. So we had to acquire those to even have the option to develop on our site. But in addition to that, Nordstrom was owned their box, and we had to acquire the Nordstrom box when they closed. We've had to acquire 7 of our boxes across our portfolio to get to a greater control of our real estate. And even then, we still have Macy's and Penny's at our malls. And so even if we control the anchors that have closed, we still have REA agreements where Macy's owns their store, Penny's owns their store, and they have significant, if not overwhelming, approval rights to what can be done on the mall site. So it's an enormous challenge that I think is overlooked by a lot of people that want to create these great destinations. But the reality is, between getting control of the real estate and then having to take that and go get the right entitlements in terms of the cities and the communities is a very, very challenging task. And today, with Penny's and Macy's still in operation, you still have those obstacles. And I say obstacles, I mean, they recognize the need for the mall to change. And they're certainly much more collaborative than they were historically, but it is still very challenging because they still operate a business, and trying to bring to them ideas about creating outdoor plazas and walkability and residential and medical and hotel just gets into a million permutations of traffic flow, ingress, egress, where their customers are coming from. And so even if you own the boxes, unless you own everything, it is a long, windy road to get to where you want to go. Doable, but you have to be incredibly resourceful.
So I have a quick follow-up on that, Stephen. Are there any instances, and I'm not aware of this, but where cities or local governments have helped to helped you along or helped alleviate the difficulty in doing so, or is it all on your bootstraps as a company?
It's really all on us. I mean, as David said, the malls are generally the largest taxpayer in the community, and the cities recognize that. But many of the cities financially have really don't have the ability to be, helpful. Many do with incentives that are, based on development. But in terms of really helping you get control of your real estate, it's not something that really happens. So you're really on your own, which is the further challenge, is because it is tremendous capital investment. And if you don't have that and don't expect that, these department stores, they value their real estate much differently than we value their real estate. You can't use a 300,000 square foot Nordstrom box. So you're buying it really for land value to tear it down, and the prices have not matched up with really what the economic value is to the mall owner. So you're really on your own.
And I think from what I've seen, having been on the local government side for quite some time, is planners don't often understand the difficulty developers have consolidating and just initiating a project. And oftentimes you'll see some, I think some onerous requirements under policy or regulatory devices for these sites. But I think there probably could be a bigger understanding of what it does take to get something like this moving.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say, and again, obviously we've been living with this for 5 years and have have been as engaged on a number of projects as anyone in the country, I think, in what we're doing. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think when a developer walks in, there's a somewhat of a perception that the developer is is asking for things that they don't need, they have the money, that, you know, these are very profitable projects. And the reality is to take the risk to really create, and what we say and what we really mean, it's not just what we say. I mean, we go into these communities and say, look, this is the amenity. We want to make this the most dominant amenity for the community, for everyone to enjoy. And as David's slides showed, to create the maker's alley, to create the culture, to create the vibe, you know, but to do that, it doesn't pencil. It just unfortunately does not pencil. There's no more heavy lifting than what these projects require. And I don't think they're, and I'm not saying that there necessarily should be, but I do think it's an educational process to try and explain that this is something that you've got to have a long-term vision, a long-term perspective. And if you have someone that comes into your community and wants to invest in it to create a dominant destination, I think that hopefully the communities will start to realize that that's a really, really good thing, because as these malls go from 1,000 to 500 or 400, there's a lot of these that are going to be a real liability to the communities as opposed to an asset.
Absolutely. Okay, and I think you made a good point, is that, you know, if I were to take it further, is, you know, while these mall redevelopment sites offer amenity for the site in which it sits and the immediate surroundings, they oftentimes really become a much larger community benefit, both from the social and economic aspect. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. All right, why don't we move on to topic number 2? David, I'm gonna let you lead the questioning for this, and it's around public policy and incentives.
Okay, and I'm gonna ask questions of 3 folks, so I will promise to be brief and help everybody, and I know you're all very good at getting right to the point. So, so just to pick up on the note of the real strains on the public sector, and I'm going to reemphasize that in suburbs are aging actually faster than cities, and having sat through city council meetings where person after person stands up and says, I'm on a fixed income now, I can't afford anymore to have my real estate taxes raised, and these folks vote, so the real estate taxes don't get raised. You got to find places like this to do it. And talking about public resources, Larissa, I've had the privilege and honor of working with you on lots of terrific projects and never heard you quite as concerned as you are today. You've been talking about, to Jason and me, you talked a lot about just the devastation that COVID has really caused to retailers and retail, and the importance of the public sector finding a way to step in to help launch the next generation or restore the current generation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely, David, and thank you for having me. I think, you know, we knew that retail in many ways was broken before. You know, we had talked about a retail apocalypse. We've recognized softening, but COVID has really accelerated that. And, you know, the previous financial models of the mall where the anchor drove a lot of traffic for the inline stores, it doesn't work anymore. So, you know, what should the public sector do? I think that first and foremost, they need to recognize and acknowledge the changing market dynamics and be open to accommodating a mix of uses that allow us to right size these spaces. You know, I always say that the public sector's job is to set the stage, to make sure that we have accommodated and supported the movement of goods and people to these stores. And I think that remains critical. This is an opportunity for us to fix a lot of things that were perhaps broken with the regulatory and zoning frameworks that existed. So I'll mention, you know, enabling much more flexibility in uses. You know, many communities have a lot of fear of residential development, for instance, because it brings school children, and we face that. And, you know, how do we recognize that we're going to have to support mixes that perhaps people weren't quite open to before? The other is this belief that, you know, ground floor retail is, you know, was the one thing that enlivened spaces. I think we have to be ready to acknowledge that the amount of retail we can perhaps support in these places has been reduced, and that you know, how can we provide thoughtful approaches to non-retail ground floor spaces that continue to create great environments, perhaps through flexible guidelines and design guidelines that are developed with a recognition of those challenges. I think things like signage restrictions that are embedded in so many codes really keep businesses from, you know, catching the eye of consumers, and we're often involved in changing those frameworks to enable businesses to better to run their businesses. And then, you know, I think mobility and infrastructure, if it comes to setting the stage, the best thing that we can do to support retail is making sure that consumers, goods, and services can get to those businesses and vice versa. And that means the networks around these sites are really critical. You know, do they accommodate a wide variety of uses? Is there connectivity for walkers and bikers and drivers? And how are these malls connected to what's around them? And I think those are sort of some of the basic starting points when we think about what the public sector should be thinking about.
Okay, thanks a lot, Larissa. I would love to follow up with you, but I think we're going to need to move on. I will note very quickly that the example I used before of artists work cell gallery spaces basically in that parking garage. They would have liked to have had retail. They couldn't make it work. Boy, those folks do not pay a penny of rent, but they do bring literally 25,000 people every Friday night, or most Friday nights, to Belmar, who then go eat in the restaurant. So there are.
Those are the new anchors, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So Kent Gonzalez, I've had the pleasure of working for you on a very interesting project. Basically, a new higher density, mixed use, walkable redevelopment, a very cool place in a suburb that is basically almost entirely single family, very politically active, long resisted change, and frankly can afford to. It's a fairly affluent suburb. I know that you worked and was really impressed with how well you worked with your neighbors and the surrounding community. Nevertheless, some of them chose to put on a citywide ballot across Newton, Massachusetts, a referendum on whether to overturn the council's approval of the project. And you won that by roughly a 2-to-1 margin. And I wonder if you could talk about how you work with the community, how you work with local officials, and how you help people, because I don't think you sold this. I think you explained this, how you help people understand why this was Newton's future.
Sure, thanks, David. And it goes back to, I think, something that Stephen said early on, it's patience. So we have the ability, our firm had the ability to be very patient. The project was just approved in March of this past March through the referendum. Was actually approved by the city council in December of 2019, but then was challenged by really just a small group of people that were able to utilize the system to bring it to a full referendum and a full city vote, which is not an easy task and to get out the vote. But we our success started probably 8 years ago when we first started this project. And that's when David and you and Jeff came on board to help us do a wide variety of master planning studies. You educated us on other communities and other similar type projects, other villages throughout the world, really, and the key characteristics that we needed to consider as we embarked on the master planning of the site. And then we started informal meetings with neighbors, city councilors, and that brought us up to 2016, when the then mayor was very excited about the project, wanted to announce it. And so there was a big public announcement of the project. And that's when we started the sort of call informal public meetings. Prior to that, we were really meeting privately with staff and just trying to get ideas. But this started our really informal public process where we reached out to every community group we could, every city councilor, particularly the councilors in our ward. We probably knocked on almost every door in the community. And I want to just emphasize the point that David made earlier about this being an affluent community. There are 360 communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and Newton, Massachusetts is one of the 9 most expensive communities to live in. The average home price is $1.2 million. So you can imagine not a lot of diversity here. And we focus on rental properties, so that this community was a key target for us because there really are no apartments. But so we were able to, again, working with all the community groups, the affordable house, there's minimal affordable housing. I think in the previous, I want to say 10 years, there were maybe 14 affordable units created, and we were building 140 as part of our project. So we were able to get a lot of support from the affordable housing advocacy groups and also the sustainability groups. Our project started out as LEED being the key driving force for our sustainability strategy. As we met with the sustainability folks in the community, they helped us, they educated us, and now this project will be the largest passive house project in the Northeast. We've got 800 units, and almost all of them will be in a passive house building. And they'll also all be LEED for Homes projects as well. So we're doubling down on sustainability because we really see that that's the future. There will be no fossil fuels. All of our buildings will be all electric. We are going to use gas or allow gas to be used for our restaurants, however, for cooking. But these are all components, and I'm sort of talking about how these are things that we're doing, but these are things that we were brought along to do by working with the community. So the project became really the community's project, not just ours, because we listened to them. We had parking, all of our parking was above ground. Now all of our parking is below ground. And that opened up open space and really broke down our buildings to make it a much better, more compatible community design for the site and much more village oriented. So now that we've got almost 40% of the site as open space. But again, this drove, when we got to the city council approval, and then there was the challenge, from that point, from December to March, we didn't really have to do much. We as a company, it was the community groups that we worked with that took the challenge. They went out and they knocked on doors. They were making phone calls. They were standing at the subway stations and the light rail stations and the bus stops. They were at the grocery stores talking to their fellow residents, trying to get support for this project to make sure that it wasn't voted down. So that's really the patience and taking the time to really listen and work with people and adopt whatever we could into our project that made sense for them and made sense for us as well. So it's easy if you've got time and money. It's very easy.
Well, I think it takes at least one more element than that, which is the patient and genuinely interested persona you brought to those conversations, because I saw that. I also want to emphasize that what Ken has managed to do in this process is create not a development, but a new neighborhood, which I think is really wonderful. Colleen, you come from, how should I say it, a city known for its political activism, not always in support of private development, and very progressive in its politics, City of Vancouver in Canada. And can you talk about how your city's policies have evolved or not to enable developers to work with and unlock the very different potential that these sites now have as opposed to what they were? And this probably comes right back to some of the things Stephen was talking about and that Kent and Larissa have talked about.
Thanks, David. Just let me start out by saying that in general, large mall sites in Vancouver and environs represent some of the last large developable parcels of land in our landlocked city. They tend to be well serviced, well connected to transit, that's key, and have established shopping culture. Metropolis at Metrotown, 60-year master plan that we're working on, Carlo and I are working on that, is a great starting point. So from a public policy point of view, we're looking at a variety of housing tenure types in mixed use communities, from market rental, market condo to city mandated levels of affordable housing, affordable rental. There's a lot of talk here in Vancouver about increasing affordable housing and rental stock. It's a news item that's on every other day. In order for that to pencil out for developers, there must be a conversation for its increased density and height. And that is something that Vancouverites are well accustomed to since probably the mid-80s. So from that, the authority having jurisdiction also generally seek what's called community amenity contributions and other cost charges for that increased density, for the privilege of developing that, because that all needs to be accounted for in the pro forma. And in some cases, it can be quite challenging for our developer partners, depending where these projects are being developed, what part of the city. In addition, housing partners such as BC Housing, affordable housing partners, will also come to the table to help deliver housing at the affordable end of the spectrum within large development sites. Just a note, the City of Vancouver has what's called a discretionary zoning process, whereby density and uses to a certain degree can be negotiated. In other jurisdictions like City of Burnaby, New West, surrounding the city, they're a little bit more prescriptive about what is desired up front. So in the case of affordable housing, it can be mandated often in the order of 20%. And with that, the developer often will build that as part of their development, or build a distinct building within the neighborhood to meet that 20% requirement. So with Metrotown, we're working very closely with City of Burnaby with their new evolving housing policy targets, right in the middle of when we were doing our 60-year master plan. So what we're getting into in this case. We're working with them, it's informing our plan. So with that, it encourages diversity in housing type and increases accessibility for people in some of the newest parts of our city. So how one develops this in terms of form and character is obviously the fun part for architects. That can take many forms. So one benefit and strategy to unlocking the long-term development potential of these sites during the master plan process and ensuring there's enough flexibility. I think Larissa touched on this. Enough flexibility to respond to market conditions. And I think that how that can be responded to is creating kind of a flexible zone for density. So with our plan, we looked at a range of floor heights to allow each parcel to develop within a range of density and tower heights as we moved through the 60-year master plan. With regards to flexible zoning, creating a range of well-defined uses is important. I think David talked about what is coming in the forefront now is that last mile distribution center that have a need really to be embedded in our communities in a way that doesn't compromise streetscape and create traffic issues. That is key, but it's here and now. So these functions have not been traditionally welcomed, but their day has arrived. Just looking at online retail from the mid-90s to 2015, going from 3% to 10, and from 2019, it's shifted to 30. So managing retail space and expectation of the folks that live in these communities is key.
Thank you, Colleen. Jason, should I jump to the next set of questions? Or do you want to?
Let's do it.
Okay, thanks. So, Colleen, I'm sorry, I wish we had more time to follow up. We're going to have version 2 of this. Program and use mix. And Whitney, this is going to go to you, so be prepared here. You've talked a lot about how proud you are and excited you are about the work you're doing at Hawthorne Mall. In terms of creating an 18-hour live, work, play, and all the other good stuff environment, could you talk about what mix of uses you're creating and how you're thinking about making that, designing and programming that mix to really make 18 hours real?
Sure, yeah. Well, thanks for having me today. So Hawthorne Mall is a mall, fantastic real estate, located in an affluent suburb of Chicago called Vernon Hills. And, as Stephen was talking about Main Place, some very similar analogs here. As I mentioned, bullseye real estate, great market, strong demographics, but really built for yesterday's consumer. And so as we go through our planning process, and it's really extremely holistic, kind of from the ring road into the project, and looking at not only kind of traditional retail uses, but also mixed uses. So hotels, multifamily, office, sometimes medical office, but then also what's the right mix of the retail. So yesterday's malls were often, primarily focused on soft goods. Now it's much more a blend of soft goods, restaurants, entertainment, fitness, adding a grocer, adding kind of all the different uses that are not only going to extend the length of stay for consumers, but also increase the frequency in which consumers are coming to your project. And that then ultimately makes your asset more relevant to them. It also increases brand loyalty for the project. And so, as Stephen mentioned before, this, live, work, play, shop, dine, entertain, when all of that converges, you have an 18-hour-a-day destination. And so at Centennial, we look at achieving that by going through a 3-phase process. The first phase is value preservation. So, we want to protect our asset and our investment. And so we go through immediately kind of a repositioning process of, identifying what the opportunities are and then activating that center through strategic messaging, creating a consistent rhythm of activity at the project. So both in the common areas as well as with our tenants. And then lastly, with placemaking. And we had the opportunity to work with Stantec at 2 of our Chicago properties, Hawthorne, as you mentioned, David, as well as Fox Valley in Aurora, Illinois. And both properties, we were in this first phase, we were challenged with trying to create a really important kind of pivotal primary space in the project that would create another reason for consumers to visit the asset, but it would also create, kind of a buzz about the property with tenants, and would become a reason existing tenants would want to renew or prospective tenants would want to come. And so ultimately what we designed for these 2 assets are essentially what we now call our center parks. So taking the kind of previous center court gathering space, we transformed that real estate into an indoor park experience of kind of the convergence of tech and placemaking and really unique design, as well as kind of games and activity and unique vibrancy that now, again, really achieves that goal. And then the last 2 phases, that while kind of phase 1 continues and we're focused on that strategic activation, phase 2 is value exploration. So going through the master planning process, working with the community, understanding, what the real opportunities for transforming the space. As we all know, typically malls are overbuilt. No one needs a 1.3 million square foot mall anymore. And so how do we repurpose that underperforming space, starting with department stores or vacant department store spaces, and then really working inward and reducing the interior small shop space. So going through that process, and then ultimately the third phase is the value creation. And that is getting the entitlements, getting the incentives that the team was just talking about to make that financially viable. And then ultimately kind of the last piece, which I hate to say it's the simplest, but as you have all said, these are very complex assets that require a lot of time and a lot of money. The last piece is almost the simplest, and that's just going vertical. Once you have a great plan, building and executing on it. So, that's how we look at merchandising and planning and specific to Hawthorne Mall.
Thank you. Listening to you, it's fascinating to realize how you're all able to see these things as assets at one moment and at the very same moment as community building. And
Sure.
work from both perspectives. Kent, very similar question to you. So when you were looking at the project in Newton, what did you see as really essential to give it the kind of the life and vitality that was so important to you? Because I remember you talking about it. And there's two parts to this question. The other is, how did you make economic diversity, that means affordable housing, work, particularly when there hadn't been much of it?
Well, yeah, it's this property portion of it we've owned. We were the original developers of the Marshalls Plaza that you had shown in your earlier slide, and back in late 70s, early 80s. So we've owned the property, most of it for quite some time. And we acquired adjacent properties that were really made up of an historic mill building and then a sort of an outdated, obsolete, also historic, but not deemed historic enough to renovate or save another old industrial property. So we had time to sort of evaluate. And there was a time, probably 12 years ago, that the project was evaluated and a process started to create an old-fashioned lifestyle center anchored by a big box with some perimeter multifamily. So luckily that didn't go anywhere. So we waited a while and continued to watch the market, and knowing what we know about Newton, actually our headquarters are there, but this is really, it's interesting that this 1980s project's really the only project that we've ever really done there until now. So we've been watching the market, and we know the community. We know that we're developers of rental residential property, and that the market was just screaming for this, because there's no place. Empty nesters want to go someplace. They don't want to leave their community. They don't necessarily want to invest in a condo. But they want all the amenities. They don't have to shovel their car, their driveway. So we knew, and as you said earlier, particularly in Newton, the demographic for 65 and older is growing rapidly. And there's demand, as you can imagine, given the affluent nature of the community. The school system is probably one of the top 2 or 3 in the state. So everybody wants to live in Newton for the schools. So the key is getting the empty nesters to move out of their homes, to open them up for families, but then give them a place to live. And we knew that that was really one of our key target markets. And then there's also the millennials. There's really sort of a barbell demographic that we identified. So that's really what we're targeting. The retail, it's interesting. We had thought that the site could accommodate more retail given the nature of its location on a pretty major arterial through Newton. And thanks to our local market analysts, as well as Street Census market analysts, we dropped our retail from 237,000 square feet to about 115. Now, being good developers and listening to our consultants, they told us it really should be 80 or 90, but we kept it at 115 just because we know better than the consultants, of course. So, but it's not that much. And again, we don't look at our retail as destination retail as much as we look at it more as amenity retail for the surrounding community, as well as the village, the neighborhood that we're creating. So and we now, given everything that's going on in the retail environment, we've got a little time to watch and sort, because our first building probably won't come online for 4 years. So we've got time to track and watch and make sure we build in the flexibility to adapt to whether it's service, retail, maker space, a lot of different things we can do with our space, because it's aligned down a main street environment that we're really trying to create activity. Then we also have a 180,000 square foot old mill building that used to be the headquarters of Clark's North America. And when they moved out, we saw that as a great opportunity to take that building and convert it into really a Class A brick and beam building that really doesn't exist in this market right now. And on top of that, we're in a site that's been designated as the N-Squared Innovation District. So there are two communities, Newton and its adjoining community, Needham, that is trying to really consolidate and encourage development in this zone that they've created to call the N-Squared Innovation District. So it's a great spot, and the demographics and the market is perfect for us right now, we think.
I'll just as a quick note, because I've done planning for the this innovation district, that some of the first companies who showed up would not come to any of the sites in this district unless they knew there was going to be new housing for the employees they were going to create, try to attract. Kent, so just very quickly, I'm going to assume did you cross-subsidize to create the affordable housing from all this terrific money you were making elsewhere, or did you need public investment?
No, no public investment. It's all internal private investment, and really you just have to work out the economics. Now, you know, nothing's easy and everything in Massachusetts, as I'm sure it is in a lot of areas, because of the outdated zoning system. Everything is negotiable. Everything has to be done by special permit. There's nothing really as of right, and you've got to work around the existing labyrinth of zoning regulations to try to get your project approved to allow for this type of really desired mixed-use project. So you find a balance to where once the communities, they keep asking for more and more, but you just have to explain to them that no more. If you want the garages below ground, you can't have more than 140 affordable units. If you want 200 affordable units, well, then the garages have to come back up. We don't want that. You don't want that. So we're still the largest affordable housing project ever built in Newton, and probably ever will be built in Newton. And now that's not saying much because they still need more, but you really just have to work within the economics of the project. And that's really the only way, because we're not seeking any sort of subsidy.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a quick housekeeping. We have some questions rolling in, so we're going to try to move through these next topics and get to the questions. We want to be able to do that if we can.
Thank you. I was going to try and find a less artful way of saying that, but thank you. All right, Larissa, I'm going to cut your question in half because you actually answered the first half already. So the second half is, what kinds of retail do you think really represent the best opportunities in these new mixed-use, walkable, town center, et cetera, places that your good colleagues here are creating?
Sure. Well, first I have to say you have to ask the question whether retail remains a viable use. You know, as Kent mentioned, we're finding in many markets that they're over retailed and that other uses need to be considered. That said, you know, there are uses that continue to thrive. You know, as it was previously mentioned, we could put last mile distribution in a lot more places. It's often not allowed by zoning, and I think we have to be mindful of how we incorporate that use so that this place and space continues to feel right for people. Non-store retailers, e-commerce, for instance, that's where we've seen year-over-year sales growth of up to 25%. So that's retailers that are embracing fulfillment, that are recognizing the power of omnichannel, and those remain opportunities for us. You know, COVID has done grocery and building supply very well. You know, those sectors grew by about 13% year over year in second quarter. You know, we previously mentioned residential and health and wellness. So, you know, those end up being the bright spots if we're looking for them.
Thank you. In the spirit of conciseness, thank you very much. And Jason, I'm going to hand the proverbial floor back to you.
Right. Then let us head to topic 4. I'm going to go right to Carlo on this question, Carlo, in relation to public realm culture authenticity. I know that you work globally with developers and mall properties, but I'm interested to hear, how do you know, it's tough in a lot of instances to come into these sites de novo and introduce and draw upon the authenticity. But so what do you do to use local culture and authenticity to help shape these redevelopment projects?
Well, Jason, thank you for the question. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I mean, I think that one thing that I was gonna like to say, it's you know, being a good placemaker is just being a good president. You just need to listen. And it's and frankly, it's whenever I kind of hear about the work placemaking over and over, I always a little bit kind of wary of that word, just because I think the place is there, and the listening it's a tool to connect the dots, connect the market on one side with the people of that place. And I think that to me, again, the key to listening and really being interested in what are the stories of that specific place. It's a key to create a place where people feel welcome, where people feel that they kind of belong to. I think that to me that's kind of one of the kind of most important sentiment that we as kind of designer can kind of help create if there is none. And one thing that I want to say, it's something that Stephen and Whitney have heard me saying in the past. It's when I was in Italy, a long time ago before coming to the US, I used to hate malls because what they used to do, they used to basically, when they would come into urban fabric or outside the urban fabric, they would basically dry up that local culture. What you want to go buy bread in the main piazza of a place where you feel like you belong. You don't want to go out of where you can belong to go and do things in general. And I think that at that time I didn't really know US, but then when I came here almost 20 years ago now, I realized that the importance and the pivotal moment that we're going through right now. In the US, malls are places where people do go to socialize, to create that kind of hard to quantify fabric of society. Because in a lot of places, if you erase the mall, there is no place to go. There is no place to be together as a society, as a culture. And so I think that right now more than ever, when we see again the mall are slowly disappearing because of the unique act, the binary act of buying. Now it's kind of so easily done online that you need to have more excuses to go to a mall. But what I don't like to hear often is like a mall as a destination. The mall should be a place where you are. This is your place. Destination is a place where you don't belong and you go to visit. We want a mall to be a place where you just again belong and you go, even if you don't have anything to do, even if you have nothing to buy, you go there because you see that that someone that is going to be there. That something is happening in that plaza because it always happens. And so again, I think that listening to people, to me, it's the most important thing. So that again, you can really create that connection. That's kind of all you need. Have everyone feel welcome and belong to that specific place.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And I think that's a lesson overall to planners, urban designers out there working in local governments. Is it's about through the process of reviewing a project, of working through a master plan or a site plan. It's ensuring that you're reaching out to the local population and hearing those stories and actually responding to that and incorporating that into any policy that may come out of the planning that you do. And I'm going to move then, I think, quickly to the fifth topic. And here, actually, Carlo, I had a few images you had provided, and this just kind of illustrates some of what you're doing in actually retooling the interior of malls. And you can see the open space and the public space that you're referring to, and program space as well, it looks like.
Yeah.
Well, let's move to topic 5. I think this is a very interesting topic, particularly to me as an urban designer. And I'm going to throw in Colleen, I know you had provided a few images, so you can just let me know what you would like to be seen on the screen. But let me ask you this question. So in your work in Vancouver and around, what are some of the key considerations when you talked about increasing the development density earlier and often adjacent to single family neighborhoods? What makes a redeveloped mall a better neighborhood than what may exist currently?
Thanks, Jason. I'll try to be brisk with this. I think one of the key things for integrating into an existing neighborhood and sort of creating new development is great neighbors increase the amenity of the neighborhood. In the case of Metropolis at Metrotown, if you go to that first slide, we took a traditional fortress mall and effectively opened it up to the neighborhood, creating actual connections to which was, you couldn't get through this 47-acre parcel. And we turned the mall inside out, putting retail on the street, services, restaurants, all the while retaining what we're calling our vital retail core. People want and need their retail centers, but in an urban setting, they're demanding more amenity. So the other aspect of this is, so what was once back of house, including loading docks, blank walls, grills, etc., we have to be more creative as professionals about placing those. They've now become neighborhood streets with housing, shop fronts, and services. And in the case of Metrotown, it's really well connected to the SkyTrain, which is this dashed green line is the Greenway, and a solid line our Metro commuter train. So one of the biggest moves, and we did this in concert with PWL Landscape Architects, we looked at the existing tree coverage of the site, and it was about 4% overall, creating a significant heat island in the middle of the city of Burnaby. And when you compare that to the two major urban parks in the neighborhood, which were about 22 degrees Celsius in August. So we're seeking a best practice tree canopy coverage overall of 40%, 20% of that being on the street. Where it currently sits is 4%. So that's a massive give back to the city, linking parks and connecting people with nature. As I said, we had a look at, if you go to the next slide. This is our street network overlaid on a landscape plan. We have a focus on what we're calling people first streets. And that looks at who has priority on the street. The car, as we all agree, it's important, but it's no longer priority one. We still have to have properly functioning streets without traffic issues, but we've taken a look at some of our private streets where we can be a little bit more creative and create a time-based multi-function use. If you look, there's Festival Street to the north. So on that street, if you could move to the next slide.
That one.
Well, that's our ending slide. If you go to the next one, there it is. Festival Street is, we've created raised tables, different street material treatments. By day, it could be a traditional street with parked cars, bikes, and pedestrians, but it has the ability to be closed down to traffic and turned into a place for food festivals, markets, music events, the stuff of everyday richness. And again, this is a big give back to the public realm. And if you go to the last slide, Carlo is well familiar with this view. We looked at creating a front room for the city in the form of Watershed Plaza. There's a connection to potentially a live event center or other active use like a hotel to help activate this very rich public amenity. And it's directly related to the SkyTrain, which we're considering one of our major gateways to the site. It's one of the busiest stations in Metro Vancouver. So yes, great neighbors increase the amenity of the neighborhood.
So I have one quick follow-up question on that. So, we talked about the surrounding neighborhoods. Is this series of open spaces and streets that function as public space, is that intended then to invite a patronage that's beyond the mall site itself? Is that kind of inclusive and welcoming of the entire community? Is that the intention behind that?
Absolutely. One of the big gestures is really creating that physical connection, north, south, and east, west, to connect communities, which we're Basically, a very busy arterial was separating them from the mall itself. It was difficult to navigate, doable. It was a destination mall. Now it's becoming more embedded in the urban fabric. Is increasing just to the south of the site. The whole area is in transition.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And then let's move on to our final topic.
Yes.
And David, if you want to
Yep.
kind of introduce this and get the conversation going.
And I'll tell you what, it'd be much better to have a conversation, but for the sake of time and Q&A, but not to skip this topic, because this is about how we can create equity, more just communities as we redevelop these. And you've all made very clear how important the places are that you're redeveloping to their community. Carlo, I loved your comment, and Colleen and Kent. Actually, everybody said these are places of the community, not in the midst of the community at this point. How, and maybe just one statement each or one thought each, how can we use this tremendous change that will just accelerate over the next decade to make a difference as our income gaps widen, as more and more folks are actually left behind? I think probably everybody on this call now knows that COVID has correlated not with density, but poverty. This has not been an equal opportunity pandemic, to say the least. Moving way beyond, what can these projects do to make a difference, to help make your communities more equitable, more just, and places that therefore we can be even prouder of? And you know what, Larissa, I'll start with you because you're the left end of my screen here.
Okay. I think quickly, this is an opportunity to really recognize the outsized impact this has had on small business owners, people of color, brown and black folks who have been perhaps more impacted from health metrics to also their availability, the availability of PPP loans for them. So, I feel like that we can pivot towards helping small business owners and use this to embrace, opportunity to clear regulatory zoning hurdles, permitting that created impediments and costs to these businesses historically in the past that we know we have to address and get rid of. So that's where I see, the real opportunity for cities to sort of embrace a streamlining of the processes that have made it so difficult to run businesses.
Thank you very much. Kent, can you follow that, please?
I'll try. I think that, really, I think we, as developers, we've got to find ways to improve the equity that we can provide through our projects. One of the other things that we're doing in our project of the 10%, or actually 10,000 square feet, almost 10% of our retail square footage is going to be dedicated to affordable or neighborhood retailers, people that are already in the community that will get the space at a reduced rent so that we can keep at least that much anyway. Where that it's not, I don't know, it's probably been done other places, but I don't know that it's ever been done in Massachusetts, other than maybe the city of Boston that requires community space. But I think that, in addition to the affordable housing, is critical, especially in a place like Newton that really has so little affordable housing. The only way to go is up in that community. But I think it's anywhere we work. And it all goes through sustainability, also reducing people's energy costs, and not just through the cost of their, just their housing. And that actually reduces the cost of housing if you can reduce their energy costs. So that goes across the board.
Thank you very much. Colleen.
Taking a page from New Urbanism and quoting Jeb Brugman's quote on building local culture, I'm going to read a quote. Focus on planning that's called creating a third territory of streets and squares where private interests and public uses are vitally interwoven. So really it's about creating a place that allows for multicultural possibility rather than a strict identity or marketing. Character evolves over time, but the space to do so freely should be considered in the evolution of these fantastic areas.
Thank you. Jason, I am going to skip the two of us, I guess, and Carlo.
Well, David, I think that to me, it's going back to designing through the eyes of the people. It's I think that social success equals economic success, and so it's I think that every time that I look at projects that we design, or projects in general, to me a measure of success is if you can take a picture and look at the people in the picture and see at least 3 generations. That is a place that people feel that they belong. It's a place that, again, where there's diversity, where there's where there are different people, it is a place that's economically successful. So I think, again, to me, the key is designing through the eyes of people, and equity is going to be like a consequence of that approach.
Thank you very much. Whitney?
Yeah, I don't know that I could add any more. I think those are all great comments. I love what Carlo just said about social equity equaling a strong economy, and I think that's something that's really relevant as we look at redeveloping malls and planning for the future.
Thank you. And Stephen, you started, you can finish us here.
Yeah, I think that, again, along the lines of Carlo and Whitney, our approach has been very much, as we've said, to try to become a part of the fabric of the community. I think you have to focus on the community. In Main Place, we are in Santa Ana. And what we've said repeatedly is Santa Ana is a very culturally rich community. And you could look at this mall as being a focus for Orange County or a focus for Southern California, and miss the Santa Ana market, which would be a big mistake and a big miss. So we have really focused on the culture of the community and making sure that what we deliver is for that community, throughout the community, the very fabric of the community and the culture. Because if we miss that, then our project is not going to be successful. And that's what's critically important. I think you can't design for what vision you would like. You have to design and embrace what is there, and what will be a place, as Carlos said, a place that people in the community feel that they belong. And that's the way we look at it, because I don't think you can, we don't want a project that doesn't deliver that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. As sort of a closing note, I will note that the number of folks living under the poverty line in suburbs, where most malls are located, has gone up by roughly 2/3 since 2000, as cities have become more affluent. And equity is not an urban issue anymore. It's an all of us issue. So let's now turn the floor over for the minutes we have to Q&A. And I know at least some of us can probably hang around after 3 if that's possible, but.
So I'm looking in the chat. We have a few questions.
Jason, I have them sorted per topic. If you do you want to answer or ask these questions now, or would you like to provide written responses, just given the time, since we'll probably only be able to answer 1 or 2?
I would like to answer 1 or 2, but if you have asked a question, we will certainly take your question and do our best to answer that and get those responses out. But I think while we have everybody here, maybe there's 1 or 2 compelling questions that we could end on.
Sure. I'll start with the justice and equity, since that's the last topic that we discussed. Sure. We're currently working on reimagining the future of our downtown mall in Norfolk, Virginia, and reconnect the historic street grid. We'd like to further examine the precedents you discussed. Are you available to email participants the slideshow, or send us an email with the name of the next generation Life of Urban Malls?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm assuming we will be posting this presentation. I know we're recording it, but we will also make the presentation available And by all means, you can contact us.
And having worked in MacArthur, I know there's a large public housing site right on the other side of the mall, or worked in Norfolk, the MacArthur Mall.
This question came in for topic 1. A lot of examples are in growing cities, regions. I am from a deindustrialized city in upstate New York. What do you see for malls and places losing population? What are the most common strategies for new life for them?
Boy, so I think of, and I'm not sure, Whitney or Stephen,
Is that for me? Well, I think that, look, I think if you're in a community that is obviously, for whatever reason, not growing and contracting, I think that what we have had to do, and we don't have malls in that community, but I think in those communities, but I think that what you have to look at is, as someone said, I mean, there's too much retail space in America across the board. And I think that while that's very challenging, I think that you would have to look at right sizing, the space and providing really, again, the, uses that are going to be more applicable to the community. We have some malls in communities that aren't losing population but aren't growing, and they're successful projects, but they are right sized and the community supports them. But you can't grow. It doesn't grow. So I think you've got to be able to right size a project in order to kind of deliver something that will stabilize. And it's challenging, but there is a way to do it, assuming that the community is really somewhat stable.
Jason, if the questioner can email us, I don't know if you have our email address. I'm david.dixon@stantec.com. We can send you information on redevelopment planning, which is moving ahead quickly for the Dayton Mall, south of Dayton, an area most definitely not growing, but because of the transition in its demographics and the kinds of economic resilience that regions like this do have, is transforming. And be glad to send you information about that and folks to get in contact with.
Okay. Second question for topic 1. Other than hard money, what are things that agencies can do to help support site acquisition given REAs and other site consolidation?
So I think this sounds kind of like follow-up to my question I had earlier, whether or not cities or local governments have in any way helped to incentivize or facilitate consolidation of sites. That's not my bailiwick. I'm curious if anyone on the call, on the roundtable, has any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if there is not a financial incentive that can be provided, which again is in our experience is certainly very limited with regard to cash. There are TIF and other increment financing incentives. Those are they're not helpful to really your acquisition. So if it's without the monetary consideration, really what the cities can do is to be very collaborative and very supportive of creating, of being behind you in creating the density, the uses, the variety of uses and density that will allow you to invest your capital. When they become very restrictive, because of various things, the schools or whatever it is, then they take away the developers' ability to create value, even investing their own capital. So I think they've got to be supportive of densifying the site and providing uses that they may not feel today are what they want, but ultimately what will help the developer create value for the project.
Yeah,
And if I
Yeah,
may,
I would just,
if I may add, you know, the public sector is a convener, is a natural convener. You know, we worked on projects where we have, you know, so many players and partners, and that's where, you know, leadership is really critical in understanding the individual perspectives of various stakeholders, trying to gain consensus, giving them information that will help them achieve consensus, and setting the table so that you can negotiate a deal.
So I'd say, I guess, in summary of that, and it does make sense, the regulatory framework, and that's good insight, Stephen, but regulatory framework should really allow for that variety and the density and flexibility. But at the same time, I guess looking closely at some of the urban design rules we covered, we're after 3 o'clock, and unfortunately our time is out. I think we could continue talking about this for another hour, but what we can do, if you have any questions left over in the chat box, well, by all means, feel free to contact us, you know, the roundtable participants and David and myself. But at a minimum, we'd like to try to get to some of these questions and be able to post the answers to those, along with our presentation and the recording of the webinar.
Jason, why don't you just repeat? So my email address is david.dixon, D-I-X-O-N @stantec, stantec.com. Jason?
Yep, and it's on the, we have it on the screen here, David.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
So, well, I guess with that, I'm going to thank everyone on the roundtable for a good. I actually took way more notes than I anticipated. This is very helpful in my perspective. And also thank you for all the attendees showing up. I know we're over time, but we had well close to 300 of you. So thank you so much. I enjoyed the discussion and I look forward to future discussions around this topic. So everybody have a great day and thanks again.
Thank you all
Thank
very
you.
much.
All right.
thank you.
Go forth and do great things.
Exactly.
Bye.